Hi, I am Kimmy with On William Street and welcome back. We had a nice holiday break. We had lots of time, lots of fun spending it with family. Hopefully you had a great holiday break as well, but we are ready to dive right back into it and get back to quilting. One thing that we have planned for this year is we decided we really want to work on kind of refining our skills and getting better at some of the different techniques and blocks and different things that you use a lot in quilting. So what we've done is we've gone ahead and put together this sampler quilt. And what this sampler quilt focuses on is each one of the different blocks is going to focus on a different skill. We've got curves and Y-seams and half square triangles and all sorts of different things that we're going to practice throughout the year. However, we also know that it is a lot more fun to quilt with friends. So how we're going to do this is we're going to set it up so that if you want to do it by yourself and you want to just make the sampler to practice your skills, you can definitely go ahead and do that. We'll have the fabric requirements that you'll need to make the sampler quilt. You'll see those in the blog post. So if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead. If you look in the description, you'll see a link to that. So you'll see all the fabric requirements that you'll need to make the sampler quilt. However, each month, we're also going to include the requirements you would need to make a single block or take that entire block and turn it into a throw size quilt. So each month is going to have something a little bit different. And the reason that we're doing this, like I said, we like to sew with friends. So we're going to turn it into an online quilting bee throughout the rest of the year. If you want to participate in the online quilting bee, what you're going to want to do is you're first going to want to gather some friends. And the way that this quilt is laid out, you're probably going to want to do, you could do it with 3 or 4 friends and do a smaller quilt, or everybody just makes more blocks. You could also do 6 would be great. Everyone could either make 1 block and then make a smaller quilt, or else the final person would make a couple extra blocks to fill in, or else anywhere on up to 12. So it's really going to be a lot of flexibility. If you have 8 or 9, you really could do 6 blocks and do a small baby size quilt. You could do 9 blocks and do a square throw quilt, or else you could do the full 12 blocks and do it as a bigger throw cuddle sized quilt. So there is some flexibility there. So find some friends, decide how many people want to participate, and then you can kind of decide how it's going to go from there. All right, now that you have all of the people that are participating, how a bee works is each month one person is going to be in charge. So this would be a great time for you to look at the entire sampler quilt that we have posted in the blog post and kind of decide what are the blocks that are your favorite, what are the ones that you would like to have as a full quilt. And then you assign each of those different blocks to one of the members of your bee. Everybody else would then make 1 block in that month and send them to the queen bee, or the person who is in charge that month. To do this, as far as fabric goes, you can either have the queen bee send the same fabric to everybody that they would then use to cut out the blocks and make them, or this would also be great to kind of use your stash if they just wanted to give us a color palette. It's going to give some more variation in the quilt. Everybody could use their stash, kind of find pieces that you need. Since you're just making 1 block, 1 or 2 blocks, it should be fairly easy to find some of the fabric sizes that you need in your stash. So get together with your friends, decide how you want to do it, pick which months you want to have be your months, and then every month on the very first Wednesday of the month is when we're going to post the video. So you can come back here, get the video for the month, everybody can make the quilt block, and then ship them off or give them to whichever person is the queen bee for that month. So if any of that was confusing, because I did just throw a lot of information at you, I will go ahead and outline it all and write it all down in the blog post as well. So make sure to check back and look at that and kind of see some of the different ideas and tips and suggestions on how to organize and run your quilting bee for the year. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started with our very first block. And we are going to start out easy and kind of work up to some of the more harder, and some of the blocks do kind of build upon each other. So you'll practice some of the previous skills in little pieces in some of the later blocks. So for this month, we are starting with quarter square triangles. So for this block and for all of the blocks, they're all going to require 5 different fabrics. So we do have the white, which is the background, and then you're going to have 4 different fabrics. And these are the fabrics that we have chosen for our block. We have a darker green, a gray, the lighter green, and then the contrasting yellow. So you're going to want to pick out the 4 different colors that you're using, and then like I said, we have a white for the background. So whatever color you want to do the background. And I'm going to use the same colors for all of our blocks because I'm doing the sampler quilt. And if you're doing a sampler quilt, I do kind of recommend sticking with the same color palette. It can be, more of a scrappy look, but kind of sticking with more of the same color palette for each block, just to give it some cohesion, because the blocks aren't the same. It might look really messy if you have a lot going on. Like I said, you don't have to use the same yellow necessarily, but use, use the same color, the same 4 colors in all the blocks, but you can mix up the prints and the different shades. So for the block, we're going to want to go ahead and cut out our pieces. And what we're going to need for this one, it is a 9-patch block. So we're going to need 4 for the corners, and those are going to be at 6.5-inch squares. Each of these blocks are going to finish at an 18-inch square, so they are nice big blocks. So they'll go pretty quick and easy. You also need a 6.5-inch gray square. Then you're going to need 4 7.5-inch squares, and these are going to make our quarter square triangle. So we're going to need a white one, a yellow one, a light green one, and a dark green one. And these are all going to be 7.5-inch squares. Now to make quarter square triangles, we're actually first going to start off with making half square triangles. So you're going to place the 4 blocks on top of each other, and you're going to want the dark green with the white on top of it, and then the yellow with the light green on top of it. So the gray is the center, so we don't need that one, and then the yellow is whatever color is going to go around the center one, and then the white is your background color. These 2 aren't going to matter as much which one goes where, just don't put these 2 next to each other. Make sure that they're kind of on these up on the background, and then the one that echoes around the center square. You'll see how it kind of looks on the finished block here. So then after we do that, we're going to take and draw a line. This is a heat erase pen, so it will come off when we iron it. You could use chalk, you could use honestly a pencil. We're going to cut on this line, you're not going to see it. So what you're marking it with isn't that big of a deal. And we're going to put one from corner to corner there, and one corner to corner here. Then what we're going to do is take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew a 1/4-inch seam on both sides of those lines. Now that I've sewn on both sides of that line from corner to corner, I'm going to go ahead and cut right along that line. And that's going to give you about your 1/4-inch seam on both of those. Then before we go to the next step, we're going to want to take these over to the iron and make sure that we press them really well. All right, so now the blocks are ironed and we're ready to go ahead and put them into the quarter square triangle. So we're going to need 1 of each block. When you're lining these up, you're going to want the white and the yellow, or your background square and the color around the center square, to not be touching each other. And you're going to just line them up right on top of each other. So you have 1 triangle on this triangle, 1 triangle on this triangle. And what we're really going to want to focus on here is making sure that seam is lined up. So I'm going to go ahead and work on getting that lined up. If I had planned properly, if you iron it the opposite direction, it would have been really easy to nest those, but I did not. So I'm going to make sure I've got it lined up really nicely, and I'm going to put a few pins down along that seam. And that's going to make sure that we end up with the points that we want in the finished block. Okay, so now that those are pinned in place, we're going to take our ruler and we're going to draw another line. Oh, I need to move this one just a little bit. Draw a line from corner to corner, again going across that seam. Then we're just going to repeat and sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of that line, and we're going to repeat that for both sets of those half square triangles that we've already made. After you've sewn on both sides of that seam, we're going to just cut down the middle again like we did previously on both of those. Cut right on that line. Oh. And now we have our 4 blocks. So we'll go ahead and give those a good press, and you can see, because we made sure that those lines seamed were right on top of each other, how nice our little points are there in the middle. Now, one thing that you're going to want to notice here is that these are not identical blocks. You can see that they mirror each other because of the way that you lay the pieces on top of each other. So if you are doing 4 different colors, keep in mind that they're not going to be identical blocks. They are going to be mirrored blocks. So depending on the pattern that you're doing, that may or may not work to do them all this way. So just like I said, if you've got a different pattern that you're working on quarter square triangles on, keep that in mind as you're planning out your placement and your color placement. So, now that our blocks are pressed, we're ready to go ahead and square them up, and we want the final size of these to be 6.5 inches. But we want to make sure that the point is still in the middle. So what we're going to want to do is I have my ruler here, and I'm going to use my 45-degree line. You can see here on the ruler I've got this line that goes through that shows me the 45 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the 3.25 inch mark right in the center. And that is going to make sure that I've got 3.25 inches on this side, 3.25 inches on this side, and it's going to get me the 6.5 inches that I want. Also, if you look at the 6.5 inch lines, they should touch right along the seam line, and that's going to tell you that everything's going to be nice and square how you want it. So double check all of those measurements before you trim it up here. So line up the 45-inch line, put the 3.25 right on the center spot, and then take off the extra. Now we're going to turn it around, and that should line up right on the 6.5 when you do those same things. Put the 3.5 in the center, line up your 45-degree line, take it off, and if we did it right, our points should be right inside those corners, and that one is looking pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and trim up the rest of the blocks. Now we are ready to go ahead and lay out the quilt. So this is a 9 patch, so there's going to be 9 squares. So we're going to put a white in each of the corners. The gray is going to go in the middle. And then our quarter square triangles are going to go on the opposite side. And so the yellow is going to face towards the gray. And you're just going to want to make sure that you have matching on opposite corners. So you'll have the 2 lights and the 2 darks next to each other. So now that the whole quilt block is all laid out, we're going to go ahead and sew it together, and we're just going to sew it together in rows. So these 3 together, these 3 together, these 3 together, iron, and then we'll sew the 2 rows together, and the quilt block will be done. Now the quilt block is all done. As you can see, this month was a fairly easy block, so really take the time to spend time to focus on those seams. Get them lined up right on top of each other so you can get those nice points in the middle. And then also really make sure that as you're working on these corner seams where everything comes together, that you're taking the time to really make sure those are nice and lined up. Use a couple pins if you need to, really double check your 1/4 inch seam. And that's going to set you up for a really nice block. Now when I say to take the time to make sure that these things are lined up nicely, I am aiming for well done, not necessarily perfection. So if you have one that's a little bit off, no, you don't need to unpick it and put it all back together. But just take a little bit more time to kind of focus on, because like I said, it's an easy block. And it's going to give you the opportunity to really kind of perfect how to get those seams to line up correctly for some of the blocks later on that have a lot more or that are a little bit more complex in the series. If you like what you saw, don't forget to subscribe. That will also make sure that you get notified. Hit the little bell to get notifications so that as we post these, it will be the very first Wednesday of every month where we'll have a new block for your sampler quilt. You can also get all the instructions on our blog. The link is in the description of the video. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Also, if you are making this, please go ahead and tag us and use hashtag #OnlineQuiltingBee2020, and so that we can kind of follow along and see all the different things that you guys are making. We would love to kind of see the projects that you're doing and see the blocks that you're putting together, and we will see you next time. Bye.